Imagine this scene. It is the dead of winter in 1655. Freezing winds howl across the Polish countryside. A Swedish force of more than 2,000 battle-hardened troops, complete with heavy cannons and hardened mercenaries, marches toward a small hilltop monastery. They outnumber the defenders roughly 7-1 at the beginning, and the ratio grows even worse as reinforcements arrive. Their clear orders are simple and brutal. Capture the fortress, plunder its sacred treasures, and extinguish the final spark of organized Polish resistance in the region. Inside those walls, only about 70 Pauline monks, around 160 professional soldiers, and between 80 and 100 local volunteers, including nobles plus their retainers. In total, roughly 300 defenders. No royal army is coming to save them. No massive reinforcements. Just thick stone walls built for defense, a limited number of cannons, unbreakable determination, and the legendary Black Madonna icon watching over them all. The Swedes send a formal demand for immediate surrender. The defenders respond not with words, but with the thunder of cannon fire that echoes across the snowy valley. For 40 grueling days and nights, the siege rages through bitter cold, smoke, and constant danger. Cannonballs smash into carefully reinforced walls that stubbornly refuse to crumble. Thick fog mysteriously rolls in at the most critical moments. One of the heavy Swedish siege guns reportedly explodes with catastrophic force, killing its own crew. And on December 27th, the invaders finally turn around and withdraw in defeat, their pride shattered. This is the authentic story of the Siege of Jasna Góra. It was a dramatic, against-all-odds stand during the Swedish Deluge that transformed into one of the most powerful symbols of Polish defiance, faith, and national revival in history. If you love epic underdog stories where courage, clever tactics, deep faith, and raw human grit collide during some of the most desperate moments in history, then smash that like button right now. Turn on notifications and let us dive deep together into one of Poland's most legendary and inspiring chapters. You will not want to miss this. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel where we bring history to life with all its drama, detail, and unforgettable human moments. I am really excited today because we are exploring one of the most inspiring and cinematic episodes from the 17th century, the Siege of Jasna Góra in 1655, right in the heart of the Swedish Deluge. At this point in time, the once mighty Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, a vast and powerful state that stretched across huge parts of Eastern Europe, was being systematically overrun and torn apart. Yet on a bright, strategic hill in the town of Częstochowa, a relatively small group of determined defenders stood firm against overwhelming odds. This was not just any random fortress. It was the revered Pauline Monastery and major pilgrimage site that housed the Black Madonna of Częstochowa, an icon traditionally believed to have been painted by Saint Luke himself and venerated for centuries as the queen and protector of Poland. Under the calm but iron-willed leadership of Prior Augustyn Kordecki, these roughly 300 defenders converted the peaceful monastery into an improvised but highly effective stronghold that the Swedish army simply could not crack despite their professional experience and superior numbers. Their heroic stand quickly became legendary. It inspired scattered resistance groups all across the country and was later immortalized in Henryk Sienkiewicz's massive epic novel The Deluge, which itself became a beloved film that every Polish schoolkid grows up knowing. Over the next roughly 28 minutes, we are going to break everything down carefully and entertainingly. We will examine the bloody historical context of the Deluge, the incredible preparations and impossible defense, the key military clashes and daring sorties, the reported miracles balanced with realistic military explanations, the dramatic Christmas climax, and finally the enormous cultural legacy that still resonates today more than 370 years later. This story perfectly mixes clever military tactics, brutal winter warfare, personal courage under fire, and profound cultural and religious faith. It is equal parts action movie, spiritual journey, and history lesson. So buckle up tightly, because we are about to charge straight into the snow and smoke of 1655. Let us begin. Let us set the stage properly so you can feel just how desperate the situation was. In the middle of the 17th century, Europe was a continent full of constant warfare, shifting alliances, and ambitious kings looking for any sign of weakness. The Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth was geographically enormous and once culturally rich, but it suffered from a unique political system called the Golden Liberty. This gave the nobility enormous power, including the right to veto almost any royal decision. While it sounded democratic on paper, in practice it created paralysis and made the state vulnerable to stronger, more centralized neighbors. King Charles X Gustav of Sweden was exactly that kind of ambitious and ruthless leader. He saw Poland's internal divisions and recent wars with Russia and Cossacks as the perfect opportunity. In July of 1655, his largely Protestant Swedish forces, strengthened by many German mercenaries who fought mainly for money and loot, poured across the border in what the Poles still remember as the Deluge or Potop. The invasion moved with shocking speed. Major cities including Warsaw and Krakow fell one after another. Large portions of the Polish nobility, seeing the writing on the wall, chose to surrender or even switch sides to protect their own estates and privileges. King John II Casimir was forced to flee the country into exile in Silesia. It genuinely looked as if the entire Commonwealth might collapse entirely, more than a century before the final tragic partitions that erased Poland from the map in the late 1700s. Swedish and mercenary troops looted Catholic churches without mercy. Church bells were melted down to create new cannons. Sacred art was stolen or destroyed. For Catholic Poland, this was both a military and existential nightmare. Yet even in this darkest hour, resistance never completely disappeared. Small guerrilla bands of peasants and minor nobles began harassing Swedish supply lines, ambushing isolated detachments, and keeping the flame of defiance alive. And right in the southern part of the country, on a modest 300-meter-high hill, stood Jasna Góra, Bright Mountain. This was the home of the Pauline Monastery, a major pilgrimage destination that drew thousands of faithful visitors every year. Its elevated position and already thick defensive walls made it naturally strong. Prior Augustyn Kordecki, a highly educated, level-headed, yet deeply resolute Pauline monk, recognized the danger early. He did not wait passively. He actively gathered muskets, stockpiled gunpowder and food, hired experienced professional gunners, and began organizing the roughly 70 monks together with 160 regular soldiers and between 80 and 100 local volunteers, including nobles plus their retainers. The precious original Black Madonna icon was carefully hidden away for safety, with a high-quality copy sometimes displayed in its place. The defenders were fully prepared to protect not only their sacred shrine, but also the very spirit and soul of the Polish nation. On November 8th, a smaller Swedish cavalry detachment of about 300 men commanded by Jan Wedgehard arrived at the foot of the hill. They politely requested permission to garrison the monastery. The monks firmly refused. Then, on November 18th, the real hammer fell. General Burchard Müller von der Lunden arrived with his main force of around 2,250 men. The full siege began in earnest. These Swedes and their allies, flushed with victory after victory elsewhere, fully expected this tiny hilltop religious site to surrender within days, maybe even hours. After all, most of Poland had already submitted. They were about to learn a very painful and expensive lesson. Now let us take a closer look at the true star of this entire story, Jasna Góra itself. Perched proudly on its hill, the monastery complex was far more defensible than it first appeared. It featured strong stone walls, cleverly angled bastions designed to deflect incoming cannon fire, a deep protective moat, and already 24 cannons mounted in good firing positions. The Pauline fathers had successfully defended the shrine against threats in previous centuries, but 1655 demanded they go into complete military mode. Prior Kordecki proved himself an outstanding leader. He personally drilled every able-bodied man, monks included, in musket handling, reloading under pressure, and basic artillery operations. They reinforced the earthworks, built additional barricades, and prepared fallback positions. To maintain sky-high morale during the freezing winter, they held daily masses inside the church and conducted solemn processions carrying the blessed sacrament along the walls, visible to both defenders and attackers. The Black Madonna was much more than a beautiful religious painting. For the defenders, she represented the living heart of Polish identity, a powerful symbol of heavenly protection, resilience, and hope in the face of overwhelming evil. The Swedish troops, by contrast, were experienced professionals who were now facing their first serious resistance in this campaign. They had to endure harsh winter conditions, long and vulnerable supply lines that were increasingly attacked by Polish guerrillas, and defenders who were fighting for something far more meaningful than mere pay or plunder. This psychological difference would prove crucial. Serious fighting began in earnest in the second half of November. Swedish artillery opened up with a roar that shook the ground. Cannonballs hammered repeatedly against the monastery walls. Yet thanks to the strong fortifications, elevated defensive positions, and effective counter-battery fire from the defenders, breaching the walls proved much more difficult than the Swedes had anticipated. The 300 defenders refused to play a purely passive role. They repeatedly launched daring nighttime sorties. In one particularly bold operation, small groups slipped quietly out of the gates under cover of darkness, successfully spiked or destroyed several Swedish cannons, and made it safely back inside before the enemy could organize a proper response. Another raid managed to wreck an important Swedish redoubt and capture supplies. These actions boosted defender morale enormously while humiliating and frustrating General Muller. Inside the walls, life was a constant mix of tension and devotion. You could hear hymns and prayers blending with the crack of musket fire. Wounded men often refused to leave their posts, insisting on contributing however they could. Prior Kordecki seemed to be everywhere at once, directing defenses, offering encouragement, writing firm but polite rejection letters to Swedish surrender demands, and leading spiritual services that reminded everyone why they were fighting. Outside in the Swedish camp, conditions grew steadily worse. Soldiers suffered in the freezing snow. Food and ammunition supplies became harder to maintain. Desertions slowly increased. General Muller tried every tactic in the book: formal negotiations, offers of bribes to key defenders, and dire threats of total massacre if the monastery fell. None of it worked. By the middle of December, the Swedes brought in even heavier 24-pounder siege guns. These caused visible damage, especially to the northern bastion. The situation inside Jasna Góra grew increasingly tense and dangerous, but the defenders held their nerve. This part of the story is where historical accounts become especially fascinating and where faith and military reality intersect. In his own detailed memoir called Nova Gigantomachia, Prior Augustyn Kordecki described several remarkable events. Cannonballs sometimes seemed to veer off course at the last moment, failed to penetrate the reinforced walls as expected, or caused far less damage than their size suggested. The defenders interpreted these as signs of divine protection from the Black Madonna. One of the heavy Swedish siege guns reportedly exploded violently due to a malfunction, killing or wounding its own crew. On Christmas Eve, both sides supposedly agreed to a temporary truce to honor the holy day. Historical sources differ on the exact sequence of events. Some accounts claim the Swedes pressed or renewed their attack despite the agreement. Then, according to Kordecki, a thick fog suddenly rolled in across the battlefield, blinding the attacking forces while the defenders on the walls could still see well enough to fire effectively. When the fog eventually lifted, the Swedish assault had lost momentum and they pulled back in confusion. Christmas Day itself saw one of the most determined and furious assaults of the entire siege. The Swedes threw everything they had at the walls: infantry charges, grenades, and concentrated cannon fire. Yet further artillery mishaps, combined with dwindling ammunition and growing fatigue, hampered their efforts. Meanwhile, news of Jasna Góra's continuing resistance was spreading rapidly through the Polish countryside, inspiring new guerrilla groups and volunteers to join the fight against the invaders. Skeptics and modern military historians emphasize practical factors: the monastery's superior defensive positioning and engineering, the terrible winter weather punishing the attackers more than the sheltered defenders, effective gunnery by the Polish side, and the psychological strain of attacking a highly motivated garrison. Believers, on the other hand, see the clear hand of the Black Madonna and divine intervention protecting her shrine. The truth likely contains elements of both perspectives. What remains undeniable is the final outcome. Despite every effort, the Swedes could not take the monastery. On December 27th, after approximately 40 days of siege, General Burchard Müller von der Lunden finally ordered his forces to withdraw. The small but determined garrison had held out successfully. Word of this remarkable defense spread like wildfire across Poland. It served as a major psychological turning point. If a handful of monks, soldiers, and volunteers could resist the mighty Swedish army so effectively, then perhaps the entire nation still had a chance to fight back. Guerrilla warfare intensified dramatically in the following weeks and months. King John II Casimir eventually returned from exile. In 1656 at Lviv Cathedral, he pronounced the famous Lwów Oath, formally placing the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth under the special protection of the Virgin Mary and promising reforms. The deluge was far from over. It dragged on for several more painful years with enormous suffering on all sides. But Jasna Góra became the shining rallying symbol that helped keep Polish identity and hope alive until the invaders were eventually pushed out. General Müller's inability to capture what he called a mere monastery defended by monks and a handful of soldiers became a lasting embarrassment for him. The defenders, especially Prior Kordecki, earned a permanent place of honor in Polish memory. The story of the Siege of Jasna Góra quickly entered the realm of Polish national legend and mythology. Henryk Sienkiewicz transformed the events into his sweeping novel The Deluge, creating unforgettable fictional characters like the daring Andrzej Kmiczyk, who fights heroically at the monastery. The book became a cornerstone of Polish literature and was later adapted into a popular epic film that still moves audiences today. The Black Madonna icon continues to draw millions of pilgrims to Jasna Góra every single year. Several popes have made special visits, including St. John Paul II, who often spoke of how the shrine shaped his own faith and the spiritual strength that ultimately helped the Solidarity movement contribute to the fall of communism in Poland and across Eastern Europe. Even in modern times of crisis or national difficulty, Poles frequently turn to this story of defiance, faith, and resilience for inspiration. At its core, the siege teaches us a timeless lesson that determined defenders in the right place, fighting for something they deeply believe in, can sometimes alter the course of history. It is a powerful blend of smart military leadership, strong fortifications, winter conditions, personal courage, and profound religious faith. So there we have it, the full story of the Siege of Jasna Góra. How roughly 300 defenders held off a much larger and more experienced Swedish force for 40 long days, protected their sacred shrine, and became an enduring beacon of hope during one of Poland's darkest hours in the deluge. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think the outcome was mainly the result of brilliant tactics and fortifications, the reported miracles and faith, or some powerful combination of both? Drop your thoughts, theories, and favorite moments in the comments below. Which part surprised you the most? The daring nighttime sorties or the dramatic Christmas events? If you enjoyed this detailed and balanced deep dive into dramatic European history, please hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications so you never miss an episode, and go check out my other videos on legendary Polish warriors like the Winged Hussars or the epic Battle of Vienna. Thank you so much for watching, legends. Stay curious about the past, stay resilient in your own battles, and I will see you in the next video. Jasna Góra forever.